On behalf of AmCham, I wanted to first of all thank everyone for coming this morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Oliver Roost. I chair the Communications and Marketing Committee with Charlie Purnell. And today we're very fortunate to have a guest speaker from HSBC and Chris Clark, who's been a fantastic friend, at least for me. And we're very fortunate to have him here to be able to talk about some of the digital strategies and how digital is impacting HSBC on a global basis. But before I make a quick introduction to Chris, I just wanted to make a bit of a membership appeal. Apologize for it. This is my only sales job for the AmCham for the day. For those of you wearing grey badges, you are non-members. We'd love to have you as members. We run probably about 3 or 4 events a week. And there are a lot of interesting events across a variety of different subject matters. So if you're interested, please do reach out to some of the members in the back, particularly Sonia, or the rest of the team that's here from the American Chamber of Commerce. As for the rest of the members, either we're blue members. Blue cards means you're a member. Yellow cards is a committee chair. And I don't think we have any red cards here today, which are generally the board members. But certainly appreciate all your support to the AmCham over the year, especially as we come to the end of the 2014. So on that note, what I would like to do is just quickly introduce you to Chris and then hand over to him. So for those of you who don't know, Chris Clark is currently the CMO of HSBC. He started out in various different roles in Saatchi & Saatchi. I won't say when, but quite a while ago. He's moved from there, looked after Bates in the UK, took out various roles with Bates in the UK, and then moved over to the US to look after the business in the US. And he's been with HSBC since about 2001. And he's taken various roles from e-commerce into group, and now into the group marketing for HSBC. And the diversity and the knowledge and the customer focus that Chris has brought has been actually delightful. At least from my perspective, and the sharing today, hopefully he'll bring that to light with you. I know he will. So on that note, I'll hand over to Chris to give us a bit of a sharing. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay. I'm going to give you some personal reflections on a variety of things. It's not going to be some turgid sort of data-driven digital presentation, but I will illustrate one aspect of some of the challenges we've had in digital that has been a kind of fruitful one, mostly in an area of social media. But let me start with something that's very dear to my heart. And I look at the back there and see some very well-recognized brand names on those little flags at the back there. And I think for us, the HSBC brand is one of the things that I feel very privileged over a 14-year period now to have had a role in helping shape and helping manage. But that's only 14 years of what next year will be 150 years of being present both here and across the world. And HSBC is one of those very interesting corporate cultures and one of those interesting kind of stories. And I think for us, this territory in particular has a very obviously ridiculously special place in our heart. So for all of you who are customers, thank you, because I bet there's a few in the room. And for all of you who kind of have got to know us over the years, we hope what we can do is continue to sort of provide the sort of services we do to various different customers in various different walks of life. But at the end of the day, brands are very interesting things. They are the thing that gets me up in the morning. They are one of the things that has coloured my career. And the reason I think they're interesting is it's because how they actually alchemize in people's minds. And for us, whether it was through the world's local bank or through the way we position ourselves today, we've always had, I think over the last sort of 14 years or so, a very interesting kind of approach to what is a brand. And brands are around a whole load of things. Aspects of our heritage, aspects of our values, aspects of our sort of general kind of way in which we exist in the world. And I think cultures have grown from the behaviours of organisations and brands. But one of the things that's clearly happening today, which when we look at a kind of historical photograph of some part of this wonderful part of the world, what we have to do today is start to understand that, the only thing you can rely on today is the constant process of change. And that whole connectivity that both we have as an organisation through our network of banks around the world and the obviously interconnected world we all live in is a really complex place to navigate these days. In my good old days, and Oliver was kind enough not to put any dates on anything, but I've been doing this kind of stuff for far too long. In the good old days, marketing campaign, marketing plan, well, you had a bit of telly, you had a bit of print, and you did some market research, usually through someone nice like Oliver. But at the end of the day, that was kind of it. That's what used to be your life. These days, the fractional kind of nature of marketing kind of programs that have champion, challenger, test and learn, data up to the what's names, all that kind of stuff is a byproduct of actually a kind of massively interconnected world. And we take for granted, as human beings always do, because it's our nature to take things for granted. But the change that's happened clearly, which is seismic in terms of connectivity, is one of the things that's driving a kind of change in the marketing agenda, of course, but it's also changing a huge agenda in the business world, and all of you are conscious of that. I think for me, though, I reflect on this often in personal terms, and there's a couple of you in the room here who know me very well, so you'll know that stories often about what happens to people in their lives often help to illustrate things. So my 17-year-old son will be taking a gap year in about a year and a bit's time to go and do some stuff, kick off around the world, do his thing. When I was that age, and maybe some of you who are similar age, if you did something like that, I remember I went away for about an 8-week period off on a trip when I was a student. And as far as my parents were concerned, I packed my bag and they saw me in 8 weeks' time. That was it. Didn't have a mobile phone, didn't have a kind of Facebook page, didn't have any way of keeping in touch with anybody, couldn't afford to try and pump a bunch of coins into a local coin box. So at the end of the day, we used to trust the world in those kind of aspects. And now what we do is, if we haven't heard from our kids by 5 o'clock in the afternoon in our house, my wife's going, where are they? What's going on? I hope they're all right. Most of the time she's worrying about whether the trains are running on time. But this interconnected world means we're in touch with each other and with everything all of the time. And of course, that creates a kind of expectation in and of itself that, we're all in the places we say we should be doing the things we should be doing. But actually, this interconnectedness is clearly a kind of obviously monstrous force. But it's actually something that in the kind of business world for us in particular is one of those things you've got to kind of get hold of. You've got to try and understand it a little bit better. And you've got to be able to compete. And luckily, in some instances, some of our competitors, and I apologise if I'm any fellow financial service organisations in the room, financial services organisations are a little slow sometimes in some of these spaces. And so what we've got to start to do is start to understand a bit better about what it takes to compete. And I think, there was somebody who handed me a card a second ago, I don't know where he's gone, but from Google. Those kinds of organisations can teach us a huge amount. But also there's a kind of, commonality here where we can also basically assist each other. But one of the things I think is really, really important is the kind of stormy weather that's attached to the way in which business is kind of having to operate these days. Banks, well, we've come in for a fair degree of criticism and pressure on all sorts of things, but so have lots of other people actually around the world. And you look at some of the kind of buffeting that's happened and the sort of maybe a touch at worst of a sort of arrogance that can occur in certain business walks of life, where that's the way we've always done it. So isn't that all right? So you look at some of the pharma companies and stuff that's happened in China. Is that acceptable? Was that the right things to be able to do still? It's not just the precept of sort of banks to kind of get themselves in a bit of trouble. And the stuff that kind of bugs us, because I'm here this week for our group management board and our risk meeting, we still have stuff that's all look-back stuff. And of course, you've got to own up and say, put your hands up and say, yes, we were on watch when all that stuff happened. But it is a kind of look-back quite often. It's events that took place in 2005, nearly 10 years ago. So at the end of the day, you can't necessarily escape your past. So when we talk about 150 years of proud history, we've also got to understand that the way the world now sees things is actually far choppier. The waters are kind of definitely much choppier for all of us in different businesses. One of the things I think is really interesting is to see the number of organisations that are embracing much more structured risk management who aren't banks. Sit there today and look outside the door and you can see risk functions in telcos, risk functions in pharma companies, risk functions in engineering organisations. And it's about them assessing the kind of liabilities they create for themselves in the world today. And I hope doing the right thing by their customers and doing the right thing by the kind of businesses that they operate under. But this choppy water is another component part that we live with every day. But I kind of think sometimes I have a bit of a reputation in our organisation for being someone once described me as the childlike card-carrying optimist. So I actually think all of this stuff's exciting, actually. It's not uncertain. It is actually the stuff of human beings. It's the stuff of stories. It's the stuff that makes our kind of jobs more interesting. And so for me, all of these things are factors that get me up in the morning and make me feel good about what I do for a living and not make me feel depressed and ancient and old, although I have plenty of moments where I feel ancient and old. But importantly, I kind of think the competitive spirit lives on. And one of the things I would say is, when you think about that old joke, I don't know if you ever know the joke, it's two guys walking across the Serengeti plain and they find themselves being stalked by a lion. And one of them gets out his backpack, pulls out a pair of trainers and starts putting them on. And the other guy says, "You'll never outrun a lion." He says, "Don't worry, I only have to outrun you." When it comes to competitive spirit for us, one of the things I say to my people particularly, and it's a sort of, personal thing, is that actually it's not good enough to not be the person being chewed by the lion. It really isn't. We have to basically make sure what we're doing when we do these things, when we look at our programs, when we develop new customer-facing pieces of both marketing and also service structure, is that actually we can't base this on being sort of better than the banks, actually. We have to look at other categories. And it's one of the things that I think a lot of industries don't do. As long as they're not at the back of the pack in their own pack, they feel satisfied. I don't think we can. When you're an organisation as large as we are, when change is quite often difficult to instigate, you have to go and shoot for something a bit further up the sort of target than just simply not being last. And so one of the things that I encourage us to do, and encourage all of you guys to do, is to think about that a little bit as you sort of, enjoy your breakfast and think about your business. Are you ever sitting down and being satisfied with the fact that you're not last? Because actually I think sometimes some of us think, thank God for that. And there are days when I think I'm probably played that card myself. But I think for us, what we've got to do as HSBC, because we are a big organisation that's highly visible, is we've got to lead a bit. You have to. And we take things very seriously, particularly in territories like this. The internationalisation of the Chinese currency is a massive leadership issue for us. If we are not taking a leading role in that on a global basis, our loss. Not necessarily a kind of opportunity thing that we should just go and grab. It's an absolute God-given right of ours to win. And that's how, as a management team, we see it. And I know Mr. Gulliver, our chief exec, would undoubtedly agree with me. Now, how you do it is another thing, because that's where the next bit starts for me. Someone once asked Jean-Paul Getty the secret of his success. And he said, get up early, work hard, strike oil. So, there's a lot of hard yards in there. So when we get into all of this, one of the things I say to my marketing people, and you know what marketing folks are like, I'm sure some of you are marketing people, but some of you who aren't, who have to work with them, they love to say to you, oh, we're a strategic discipline. We're about ideas. Well, yeah, kind of. If you don't deliver anything, you're about as much use as a chocolate teapot. So at the end of the day, for me, one of the things that's really important is understand what you're actually going to deliver. Get the solid things down, bang the anvil, and make sure what you're doing is understanding that the sweat on the brow of the guys who work with you and for you has an end point in mind. Because I think some of the time we love to have a chat, we love to have a strategy, we love to have a workshop. But at the end of the day, what we've got to do is understand that it's the deliverables of these things. And in an organisation like HSBC, that can be quite complicated. It can often be quite frustrating, actually. But control functions in places like banks are there for a purpose. And one of the things we try and do with some of our colleagues who are part of this working process is make sure that they arrive early to the sort of party, that actually at the end of the day they can make a contribution. And only every now and again do we have to kind of get ourselves into a bit of a kind of punch up with anybody. But at the end of the day, one of the things that's important in all walks of life is that you have something to take home at the end of the day to say, this is what we did. I just think that's sort of fundamentally important. It's not good enough to have a good PowerPoint presentation. That's not good enough. And I think for many, many people, particularly in marketing departments, that's one of the things they think is kind of fine. We did a very good brand presentation. No, we did a brilliant airport strategy that we've leveraged in every corner of the globe that actually people can't move for seeing, that may necessarily probably for some of you might get a bit bored with, but nonetheless it's ours and we're fiercely proud of it. And those are the kinds of things that I think when I stand up in the morning and say, what did I get done today? And I think that hard work part is one of the kind of things that, you know, in this territory in particular, the kind of ability for people to work hard is second to none. Finally, I think for us, some of those ideas of growth and opportunity, marketing programs that have really interesting ideas at the heart of them, are quite fragile little things sometimes. And sometimes we let those things out into the big wide world, and we have to nurture them a little bit. So when you look at innovation, when you look at change, when you look at the way in which things are thought about, managed and done, sometimes what you have to do is be quite protective of those things. So one of the things I also think is part of the maxims that I'm kind of going through here, which are certain parts of things that you're possibly understanding are things I hold dear, is having a bit of courage. Because to protect things often means having to put yourself between those things and the inbound. And so what I would also say is, as we kind of, you know, get to certain stages in our career, and I must admit, I'm further towards the end than the beginning. I know it might not look that way, but I am, promise you. Is actually sort of, as you get towards the end of these things, can you put your hand on your heart and say to yourself that you showed the right levels of courage in terms of how you understood where to challenge and where to get in the way of the kind of inbound? Because I think for me, that's a very important part of protecting some of the kind of things you're trying to get done. And sometimes they're quite fragile, sometimes they're ideas, sometimes they're very different to anything the organisation's done before. Sometimes they have risk attached to them, and sometimes they might seem blindingly obvious to you, but the others in your organisation can't see it. So for us, that protection of some of those things is very important to us. But one of the things that I think is fascinating, and I might sort of tell you a little story now. What goes on inside people's heads and how their brains work and what happens with human beings is one of those things that I have a very personal kind of interest in. If I had my chance to have a career again, I'd be a psychoanalyst, I think. I quite enjoy the kind of idea of, you know, what makes people tick. I had a kind of, you know, quite interesting to understand what makes me tick myself sometimes. You know, you have to have that ability to reflect and think about yourself once in a while. But I think for me, some of the stuff, particularly that, you know, colleagues like Oliver and the Nielsen guys help us understand is the whole idea of consumer insights and all of that kind of stuff. And I had a little meeting a little while ago, so I'll tell you this story. Maybe it's not a kind story, but I was, as you might imagine, when you've got a biggish job in a biggish company, having your sort of time sort of slightly pulled around and wasted by some people, and, you know, you can have those moments of not necessarily really finding your best hour. So this wasn't my finest hour, but I'm going to tell you the story anyway. So about 5 weeks ago, I'm at the office, and I've got a meeting with some guys in our analytics part of the kind of cards business or something, and they wanted to see us about this, that and the other, and we've been talking to them for a long time on a global basis about how we build return on investment models, how we look at kind of cause and effect in marketing, all that kind of stuff. And we were due to go downstairs. I was already late. I ran up to my desk, chucked the BlackBerry in my pocket, picked up my sort of, you know, moleskin notepad, grabbed my kind of lieutenant who was coming with me, barreled down in the kind of goods lift because I can get in the goods lift because I got a senior stripe, so I can use that instead of having to use all the other horrid lifts at 8 Canada Square in Canary Wharf. Ran out of the kind of horrible interior corridor of our building into this conference room. And there's a bloody agency in this conference room. They brought some agency in from somewhere. No idea who they were. Apologies, you know, a couple of them were from sort of, you know, across the pond with that sort of slightly American salesmanship stuff that goes on. So apologies to all of my American colleagues in the room. I'm a great fan of all things United States, having lived there, and both my children are US citizens, so I can at least say that much. But it wasn't because they were American. It's just pushy salespeople, but it'll serve me better to use an American accent as these guys were sitting there. And I got in, and they said, you know, they introduced themselves, and I just thought, oh, really? Oh, no. Well, how did this happen? No warning, no kind of, you know, we're bringing these guys in, here's a bit about them before you come through the door. You just think, oh, for Christ's sake. And so my body language was fairly obvious, I reckon. I don't think I was necessarily sort of holding stuff back. And one of these guys said, so, Mr. Clark, we're glad you can make it today. We're going to talk to you about big data. And my heart sank. It's not that big data isn't important, and there's lots of stuff going on in that area, but there's such a load of old what's it talked about it sometimes, and you do think to yourself, oh dear. So they started off on this stuff, and I was sitting there thinking, I don't want to be listening to this at all. So we're going to build you a value proposition based on big data, and I'm like, oh my God, any more buzzwords you can get into this kind of conversation? And off they went, and there was a guy on the phone who was calling in from Palo Alto and talking about unstructured and structured data and all this kind of stuff. And off they went, and on they went. Oh, I was just sitting there thinking, oh my God. And one of them decided, he'd clearly been to some sales kind of sort of training at some point, and decided that, he clearly hadn't got the kind of big guy in the room, as it were. It sounds like a silly thing to say, but hadn't got a big guy in the room to engage yet. So let's confront that issue, kind of watch him whisk it out the training manual as he goes, I don't think we're taking you with us here, Chris. No, well, I sometimes feel some of this stuff is, a little bit impenetrable, and no one's really helped convince me yet. I'm a bit of an old geezer, so, I'm allowed to do this sort of stuff. No one's really convinced me yet that this is the sort of, the right way to kind of think about the world, really. And he said, well, let me convince you about this, because I think you should run your marketing department off big data. I said, I don't want to. And at this point, I was now getting cross, and you sort of feel what's called your dog brain start to go in. You just want to bite him at this point. You stop behaving like a kind of rational human being. I just want to bite this guy and just get him out of my face. And so he sat there and he told me how I should run my marketing department, which is just, not a good idea. And then he said to me, so he clearly wasn't getting anywhere with that. And then he said, so what would you say is the underlying principle of how you run marketing? I don't know what it's like for all you guys, but you have a row with your wife or husband, you have a row with your mum or your dad or your best friend, and sometimes you'll think of that kind of smart thing you should have said, but it's an hour after the event, so you kind of think, do I go home and resurrect that at some point? Now you've got past the fight. I found something straight away. It was wonderful. It was one of those moments. I hadn't thought about what I was going to say. And he said, so how do you run your marketing department? And I said, it's really simple. We have one overriding principle that runs this marketing department, and that's our customer insights. What do we know about the lives and the hopes and the ambitions of our customers? What do we know about their businesses? What do we know about their families? How do we help them do better by those people? How do we start to understand how to connect those customers to opportunities to help them realize their hopes, dreams, and ambitions? That's how I run my marketing department. And he looked at me and went, very good. Could we have someone to work with from your team or the UK bank? No. And I stood up and walked out, right? Not my finest hour. But it serves a purpose to just say, do we understand what is sacred to us in terms of how we run different parts of our businesses, careers? What are the guiding principles that we can't be shaken from? I've been very lucky at HSBC to be backed by a management team who genuinely believe that a lot of what we do in marketing and a lot of what we do around the world is well thought through. That it comes from some sound principles, particularly customer insights. It's not a slave to market research, as much as Oliver would like us to be. It's not a slave to market research. It is about understanding how to interpret that stuff. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some stuff that says, insights can come from good research progress, but they can come from all sorts of other walks of life as well. How do you make some changes? So I'm going to take us back to the forge in a second and do that. But for me, the principles of understanding how people feel about things and why they feel those things is very important. How they understand whether they trust us, whether we believe we've got the right products and services for them, how we connect them up becomes very fundamental. And so for me, I think the important thing for us is it's always about people. Marketing is a people discipline. And so for us, important constituents as we do our marketing aren't just our current customers and prospects, it's also our own staff. And so each of those things has to be considered as we move forward. So let me take you through some of the little story I've got for you. One of the things I've talked about in our customer insights in the bank is how do we change ourselves from some of the kind of continuous programs we have and some of the sort of numbers we have and some of the big data to use that stuff instead of figuring out how are we doing, to change it into what should we be doing. And I think as you look at MI, in whatever you do for a living, figure out some of that stuff, of course, helps you understand how you're doing. But some of it should also help you understand what you should be doing. Because actually, if it doesn't help you with that, it's only doing half its job. So this is social media at HSBC. I'll tell you one final story on this, which is a risk story. I think I'm being filmed, but I'll be careful here. When we first got into social media as a bank, it was a very interesting exercise. One of the very senior guys in the bank, when it first raised its head in our group reputational risk policy committee, turned to me and said to me one day, just how bad is this going to be? So a bit of a, what we used to call, how often do you beat your wife question. You know, it's a bit leading. And essentially, I think for us, that was a sort of immediate response to it on day one, which was, this is toxic. Well, kinda, but it's also what human beings want to do, and it's what they're doing, so kinda can't ignore it. So when we finally persuaded some folks that we were going to have a go at this, we have a wonderful little business in the UK called First Direct, and they're very good, have very high levels of customer service, very high levels of touchy-feely stuff with their customers, and they have a very good service proposition. And for us, we used some of those guys to try and help us structure some work in social media. So we did, off we went to do this, and someone came back to me with the project when it was getting ready to go live, and they said, had a bit of a problem with our compliance people. I said, really? And they said, they've given us 10 statements that we're allowed to paste into the Twitter feed, and they're pre-approved, compliance-proof statements. Really? Yeah. I don't know if they really understand it, but 2 of them are more than 140 characters long. Okay. Let's get them in the room. Let's have a little meeting. So we have a little meeting with them. And I said, look, guys, I'm really sorry, but we've got to have to allow free-form conversation on this medium. We can't do this. And they went, oh, no, you can't do that. I said, look, I'm a group general manager. I kind of get paid to make acceptable decisions on behalf of the company. I'm going to sign a risk acceptance and say we'll accept the risk on this. You can't do that. I can. No, it's okay. I can do that. And you could see him fishing around. He said, you could lose your job over this. I said, yeah, give me the pen. It's that moment where you stand between the little growing plant and the sort of other bit. You take a little bit of courage. And it's not as if I was being unpleasant. And I promise I wasn't being unpleasant on this day. I was trying to be nice to the poor guy because he had to kind of get out of our way to let us do this. And of course, we launched and we did it properly. So we allowed our First Direct call centre reps who have got very high EQ to respond to our customers. And I'll show you some responses in a second. But the first thing you had to do for us in this is to set up some monitoring stuff. And one of the things we've done recently is to look at advocacy. How do we look for positive comment from customers? And I'm going to show you 2 things, because this is about, for me, going back into that sort of, forge and banging the kind of anvil with the right kind of hammer. So this was some hard work for us. So, just so you can see it quickly, I chose these. There's lots of different examples I could choose, but I picked out some stuff that were where we kind of started seeing some positive advocacy comments about us. And some of those, as you can see up there, are much more to do with some of our community agenda and some of the other things we've done. But one of the things in there that's very also important is when we got to the end here, the last one, and I think we did out on the street here over the last couple of days, Stuart Gulliver spoke at it, is actually the kind of thing we get behind, which is the lesbian gay kind of community in London, which do the Pride event. And so actually diversity is a very important part of our bank. So it's not just the lesbian and gay agenda, it's how we promote senior women, it's disability, it's all of those kind of things that we think are very important to us as an organisation. It's part of our brand in some way. It's part of what we stand for these days. So actually at the end of the day, sort of what we're starting to see is some of those things are very positive to us. Understand them and understand what to look for. And at the end of the day, one of the other lessons we learned was this one. What I've got here, sorry, I think I've got a pointer here. So this was something we did in our branches in the UK. So branch comments, Q1, Q2, massive leap up. We'd introduced Wi-Fi in our top 500 branches in the UK. So what we've seen is something that's digitally enabling got a very positive social media commentary. Good. Other one, down here, which we call branded events, massive increase, which was actually a thing called Global Connections, which our CMB marketing guys ran. What they did was a whole load of stuff around how connectivity helps businesses, how we can build kind of connections globally for our customers. But what they did was they talked about it in social media this time. and they put it into those different aspects of our feed through LinkedIn primarily. So we saw a massive increase. Now, of course, my KPIs aren't based on social media traffic or anything to do with advocacy, but I missed a trick up here. We have a Twitter handle in the UK. Why wasn't I talking about the fact I put Wi-Fi in that Twitter handle? So we missed a chance. So next time when we do a service proposition change, I have an undertaking from the UK bank that we will go immediately and tweet about it. So for us, that monitoring helped us make some decisions and change something, rather than just saying, oh, we're doing okay, we had enough positive comment this month or whatever else. Take some action. So these were just examples of some things. It's quite workaday, it's quite small, but often these are the things that change the way the organisation starts to think about something that it once thought was toxic. But it's still quite a bumpy place to be, but it's not toxic. So we do some monitoring as well in terms of speed of response, and the top 3 brands there are M&S Money, First Direct and HSBC. They are our 3 brands. When we first started monitoring about 2 years ago, and some of the others piled in on their handles, I can tell you that the next best to our scores, because we've always been around about sort of 5 to 8 minutes, the next best was 20 minutes. They all have seen over this period of time that none of that is acceptable. One of the other things we've learned about social media is it doesn't matter what you put up there or where you put it, if it's you and your brand attached to it, people will use it to communicate with you. If I do a Twitter handle for the golf tournament out in Shanghai, I will still get people going, I can't get my ATM card to work on the Shanghai one, and I still have to deal with it, so I have to get it diverted off that into the guys who can actually answer it properly. Do not drop the ball. That's another thing we've learned. You know, almost anything in this environment is open to sort of use by those customers to make those things happen. The other part to this is also allow our people to be human beings. Don't expect us to talk about policy. Don't expect to talk about any of those kind of things. So I stuck a couple up here. They're probably not very readable, but you know, simple things like some girl wanting to know how to deposit a bunch of coins somewhere. That's all she did. She just wanted to know. And as far as she's concerned, it's easier to just do that while she's going about her day and wait a couple of minutes for the Twitter reply to come through. She's possibly sitting there sort of, you know, doing her working day. She's got an iPhone on her desk. She thinks, oh, I've got to get rid of that bag of coins in the kitchen. Can I do these somewhere? I'll wait for them to respond. And then on with her work. Oh, next thing. Oh, yeah, apparently I can. Okay, well, what do I have to do? So same with that. We've had some really funny ones, which I didn't include in here, mostly because it was kind of... we had a girl who decided that she'd like a date with the guy she was on the call centre with a second ago, so she came on in this. Now, you know, if we'd started one of our people going, it is our policy as an HR function, no. So we had a kind of funny banter exchange between the two of them. We also have on First Direct a thing called First Direct Help, and they say, ask us any question. And of course, we were expecting questions around mortgages and questions around sort of, you know, things like simple mutual funds. We had a wonderful one a little while ago, which the guys, and they post all this stuff up for us to see as management. So this goes right to the top of the house, this stuff. So we all get to see it. I had a really funny one the other day, which was someone came on and said, I'm in the pub and we're having a row about who invented the skip. Can you help? So this guy in the call centre who was on the other end of the feed wrote back and said, the potato chip or the thing you put junk in? And the guy replied back and said, how about both? Give me a minute. And of course he just goes off and Googles it, but he came back and he said, the potato chip, RJR Nabisco, 1979, invented the skip. And as far as we can make out, somewhere in the 1930s, somewhere in Southern Ireland. Hope that's all right. Brilliant First Direct, love banking with you. So it's those kinds of moments where you start to understand a little bit about the sort of engagement with your customers that's now so many and various. The ability for you to allow your people to behave like human beings makes them feel good about their day at work. You know, what do you think that guy will do when he goes home in the evening and says to whoever he sort of lives with, I had a fun day at work today. I helped someone get a personal loan. No. I had this really funny exchange with this guy about skips. Yes. And kind of it's worth it because that's that human connection. So when I come back to the kind of theme of some of this stuff, for me it's about the sort of humanity that goes into our businesses, that goes into our interactions with customers. It's very personal for me that I really enjoy. And that I think is what gets me up in the morning, make sure that I feel like I've done a good job. When I can hear back from those guys to say, something I did made a little bit of a difference somewhere. So, from some lessons, what did we learn about some of this stuff? I just thought I'd finish with some sort of thoughts. Our people. Don't underestimate the engagement of your own staff in anything you're doing like this. And of course, that sounds like motherhood and apple pie. But what that means is quality engagement. It doesn't just mean a sort of staff newsletter. It actually means genuine immersion into the things you're wanting them to do, allowing them to be human beings, and make sure that if they particularly face customers, that they have the kind of backing of the organisation, that they have the autonomy and the sort of, understanding of what they can kind of do and what's allowed. And if you have a rules-based organisation like a bank, how do you make sure that actually those rules help them and don't just make them feel suppressed and crushed by the burden of administration? So they actually feel to themselves, if I say no to a customer who wants a particular line of credit, maybe I'm allowed to say, well, look, honestly, no, but we could probably lend you a little bit less, because from a credit point of view, your scoring hasn't come back that sort of to allow us to lend you that amount of money. Maybe it wouldn't be good for you anyway. There's a variety of quality conversations you can have, because banks are funny businesses. We have to say no to people sometimes who want to buy our things. If any of you work in other areas, I suppose that doesn't really happen. If you ran a supermarket and every time someone who was a little bit overweight put a big block of cheese on the counter and the person at the till went, nah, you don't want that. Look at you, you're getting a bit fat. No. And put it somewhere else, you wouldn't have much of a business left. We have to do a little bit of that once in a while. It's often for people's good that we say no to them for business reasons. But I think for us, our people are a very sacred resource, and I think we underestimate that at our peril. So engage with them very thoroughly. Second thing, particularly in this world of technology, we often have a kind of date that trumps everything else rather than a destination. So we de-scope the project so that actually we failed to deliver what we actually intended in the first place so that we can hit a date. So I don't want us to do too much of that. So I think for us, being at a state destination is very important. So my Twitter example was a tiny example of all of that. I'm going to de-scope this so you've got 10 stock statements. No, that's not my destination. My destination is a quality engagement with my customer. So actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to sort of, take my date, put it back a week while I have a discussion with you about this. So actually, lots of organisations are date-based, and I think it needs to be destination-based, even if it means sometimes a delay. As long as it's not a significant delay or a delay that gives you competitive advantage problems. I think, too many organisations do have a view in life that, date is everything, and it's not. And finally, in the sort of social media world, I thought I'd leave you with a few things to think about. Effective monitoring is where we started. Second thing is to build yourself a presence. Then find yourself some actions that actually genuinely help your customers, and then hang on tight. So if you take the words out of there, you also get another kind of key word that you want to take away from all of that, which I think is important. So I wanted to leave you with those, which are largely a lot of personal reflections. I don't mind my stories where I didn't come out entirely kind of gracefully. But I think in all of our walks of life, every day we come in and we get very close up to the kind of things we manage. And what are your touchstones? Someone once asked me to describe my leadership style, and I thought it was a bit pointless actually, but I was told to do it as a sort of in advance, so I had to go away and think about it for a bit. And I think for me, one of the things that I think is important is I found a quote from a very eminent American actually, a chap called Colin Powell. And Colin Powell said, somewhere along the line, in the sort of pantheon of all the things he said over the years, he said, "The day my people stop bringing me their problems, I know one or two things has happened. They first believe I can no longer help, and they secondly may believe I no longer care. The day those two things happen, I've now started to fail." And I think for me that is the essence of my leadership style personally. I think senior people in big jobs, your job is actually to kind of basically take on the burden of some of the things. Very rarely do people come and burden me with success. I don't get people at the corner of my desk saying, "We want you to come and share in the brilliance of our stuff we've just done." Most of the time they're there to say, the agency are late, the kind of business had got in the way, the compliance guys are having a bad day at the office. And I think, those are the sorts of things that people bring you when you get into senior roles. And I think you've got to have a joy of problem solving and a kind of understanding of other people. Because most of the time, anyone who's in the way isn't to be brutalized or bashed or shoved. They're there to be understood, and in most cases, particularly in our company, with our culture, you don't have to distrust anyone's motives. And that, I think, is one of the kind of gifts of working for an organisation that has a values-based set of principles. That we know that our basic integrity, our kind of, openness and connectedness to each other are the guiding lights in our company. And the fact that you won't agree with someone, it can cause friction. But you don't have to doubt their motives very often at HSBC. And I think that, for me, is one of the things. As a marketing guy, I sit there and look at my 14th year coming around the clock. I joined in January 2001. I'm eternally surprised I'm still there, but that's a nice thing. So anyway, I'll take some questions. Thank you.
For those of you who want to ask questions, can I just ask you just to let Chris know who you are, what company you're from, and then just pose the question, and then I'm sure Chris will be happy to take a number of questions from the floor.
Sorry, I took far too long over there.
So we're all that.
Anyone?
My name is David Fowler. I work for Visa. Thank you, Chris. I'm slightly scared about asking you a question because I have my head bitten up.
No.
The question is, from a payments point of view, and the business that we do with HSBC, the target audience is often quite mature, quite premium, very focused. I guess the question is, what's the strategy, what's the vision for the pipeline of young blood, the millennials and beyond coming into the business? It doesn't seem evident to me that there is a clear strategy of who are the new customers of HSBC going to be.
We don't take an approach that says one should think about those things in entirely unjoined up ways. One of the things that we do is, you may have seen there's some marketing that we've done recently for two of our retail propositions, one of which is for Premier, where we now talk about your personal economy, which is about actually starting to understand that for most individuals who have got to some degree of affluence, regardless of age, they need to think about a much more holistic, kind of almost personal economy, which means your property, your kind of savings, your investments are all part of a much bigger piece for you. And your personal economy's role is often to help you, if you're a younger person, perhaps think about one day starting a business, if you're in your sort of mid to late 30s, about educating your kids, and if you're in your late 40s, early 50s, about planning for retirement. Because actually, at the end of the day, it's about what's going on in your life. So actually, at the end of the day, often that's about just understanding what channels of engagement we have with those people, sometimes dictated by age. I don't think what we do is serve ourselves well by compartmentalising too much, because we've got 25-year-olds who are so conservative in their approach, and we've got 45-year-olds who are like big children. And so actually, at the end of the day, what we often find is that it's a mindset that customers bring to the party. And what you have to be able to do is embrace that. And we also, from the advanced proposition, we talk about an understanding that wherever you're going in your life and wherever you get to, there will undoubtedly have been a group of people along the way who help you get there. And we would like to play a small role in that, because together we advance is essentially what we say. Because actually we understand that there is a variety of things that will get you there. So I think you've got to go and stand back a bit and don't get kind of sucked into the idea that they're sort of different animals, really. These guys are sort of sheep and these guys are cattle. Not really. They're all the same thing. But often it's just the channels where you'll see them might change a little bit, but not always necessarily. And I think Facebook, on a global basis these days, has a kind of age sort of bell curve that peaks at about 45. My kids don't go anywhere near it these days. They're on sort of Snapchat and WhatsApp and all that kind of stuff, communicating away with their mates. I just think it's about trying to make sure you try and find some fundamental human truths in what you're doing first, and then often you'll adapt your channels and to some extent your propositions. But I don't think what it's about doing is viewing these things as entirely separated. That for me would always be a sort of moment where things have got too grey. I think there are plenty of sort of parts of the business world where there are very tight, much more tightly targeted kind of things. If I'm going to start a rock festival in Hong Kong next week, I'm pretty much sure I'm not advertising to the 60-somethings. So, those sorts of things I think you're going to be clear about. But I think for us, our thinking is always around trying to find a higher common factor that's often human-based, rather than finding a sort of segmented approach that means we're running 15 fractional programs. We've only got 2 propositions in the retail bank, I don't want any more. They have to have the right card propositions, they have to have their right kind of investment propositions and savings accounts and all that other good stuff. So I think that's sort of our approach. So how do we do it? We do it the same way as we do it for everyone in some way. We don't necessarily say millennials are different. They're going to give you a microphone.
Great. Hi. So the guy from Google. Hi, Dominic Allen from Google Hong Kong. So Chris, thanks for sharing. So my question is, if you were entering the ad industry today, which discipline would you enter and why?
Well, that's easy. So no. I'd go back to my old one, but I'd find it even more exciting. I used to be a planner. So I was a kind of account planning kind of guy for a period of time, which are the guys who get to muck around with all of the kind of customer insight stuff. And I still think there is sort of wonderful moments when you get customer insights. So I'll use your question and tell a little story of sort of something that I just think is worth understanding the kind of gold that can occur. So it was 1997. I was in New York. I was working on Pfizer, and it was prescription drugs, Lipitor, which was a statin, cholesterol drug. And we'd had two other entrants into the market already. I think Novartis and can't remember who the other guys were. They got ahead of us. Standard positioning as you'd expect, cholesterol-lowering medication was all around, don't die. See your grandchildren, grey-haired guys on the beach, lifting up their sort of 3-year-old sort of grandchildren and playing around in the surf, and pretty typical stuff. We were late into the market. One of my planners went off to do some customer research out on the West Coast, and she came back, and we sort of, sat down and said to her, Janice, how did it go? And she went, I had the moment. I said, what do you mean? She said, I now understand this. She said, I've just sat in Los Angeles on the beach up near kind of Santa Barbara with a bunch of guys who are in their middle 40s. They are incredibly fit. It's an asymptomatic disorder. All of them were high cholesterol. They feel like they're bulletproof still because they were back then the boomer generation. They kind of, you know what they run their lives off though? And this was the insight, she said. They run their lives off numbers. They know their golf handicap. They can bench press 210 pounds. They can do all of this different stuff. Their entire life is off numbers, and they all know their cholesterol numbers. So we're going to be number one at lower numbers. That's it. We're going to basically say to them, this is something that will help you win a game that you've been set by your physician. We were market leader inside 6 months. Some of those ways in which you just think about how a human being at the other end of this chain is reacting to what you're saying about your product or service can be golden sometimes. So I'd go back. I'll always be a planner. I'll always be one of those people who sort of wants to know what's going on inside people's heads. So. Any more questions? Gentleman down.
Chris, thanks very much. Hal Davis with Deloitte. What do you see as the major challenges of being truly globally connected as opposed to being present all over the world? A lot of banks have branches all over the place, but they don't seem to be particularly well connected. There seems to be a concept of dealing with the mobile customer, but how effective do you think, for example, HSBC has been with that?
Well, there's a couple of ways of approaching that one. I think one of the things that we took about 7 or 8 years ago, and no one's actually managed to really copy us yet. We got some technologists who gave us an ability to look at what we call global account view. So if you've got accounts in multiple jurisdictions, you can see them all through one sort of login screen. You can move money between them at a click of a mouse. And whilst that might seem like a kind of, for anyone, particularly the Google guy, the fact that it might seem like a fairly trivial thing to do. You're surfacing a bunch of information onto a screen. What it did for us was it was one of those, again, slightly courageous moments. I didn't have a lot to do with it at the time. I was sort of on the edges of it. But I know the guys who did it had to be very courageous because you had to kind of give our tax guys a hard time because they wanted to sort of, you're creating a single global tax view actually for these people. So anybody in any jurisdiction, if they can see it, we should be able to sort of let their tax attorneys and tax authorities see that kind of stuff. And, compliance had all sorts of other problems with, surfacing kind of data in foreign countries. But we got past it. And so I think for us, what we've got to do as a global bank is continue to have those things. And of course, if you're in the corporate side of things and you're in the kind of institutional businesses, our ability to flow our sort of products and services around the world is a sort of, is a hygiene factor actually. So I think for us, we tend to want to try and make sure what we do is genuinely build infrastructural stuff that works. The problem we've got is as with all businesses, we've got a massive piece of legacy stuff, often in the technology world, that's kind of difficult. We've acquired banks in countries that have different back office systems, therefore getting those back office systems to kind of be able to surface the right stuff into user interfaces and stuff like that isn't always as easy as it might be. So I think, the challenges for us are huge quite often, but one of the things is that we believe that those are worth doing. So I think we've got a fairly firm commitment to make sure that it feels as joined up as it can be. I wouldn't say for any of you who use any of those services that it's that kind of unbumpy, but essentially what we've got to do is continually challenge ourselves to make sure it's as unbumpy as possible. So I think for us, you've got to make sure those things work for our customers in the right kind of way. And don't create liabilities for them, and don't do anything other than help them with their liabilities, whether it's FATCA-related stuff that we're all into these days, or whether it's kind of, sort of understanding how to, move stuff to the part of the world they need to quickly, because, their home in the UK while they're living in Dubai is rented out and the boiler exploded last night and their tenant wants it fixed by lunchtime because it's now minus 6 degrees centigrade in the UK overnight. And those are the kinds of real things in life that says, if I can't move £4,000 from my dirhams account into my UK account and then pay the plumber, my tenant is sitting there with freezing cold kind of house on his hands. So, the reality of some of those things and the reasons why they work are important. So for us, I think, we never stop thinking about how to connect things up, but we also have some marquee things that should help our customers, particularly in the digital space. Anybody else? Gentleman there.
Thank you. Chris, I'm Andrew Ola, also from Google. So the airport strategy that you talked about, I think that's one of the greatest kind of media strategies out there. I love it, and I think there's only a couple places I've seen international airports that don't have that. I think Malaysia is one of them, but I would love to know how many international airports, you guys kind of have that control. And to that point, how are you using digital channels to convey that same message, the world's local bank?
Well, we don't do the world's local bank anymore, so I'm sorry to go on that one, because I think that's something that, as we started to change our business over the last few years and get away from particularly being everywhere, because we're not ubiquitous, we can't afford to be. The kind of scale isn't there for us in quite a lot of the countries we operate in, so quite rightly we've sold down a huge number of businesses, and therefore we can't really say we're the world's local bank anymore, so we kind of went away from that. But I think the airports thing, I can't remember what we've got in the way of airports. We tend to be quite cherry pick about it, so we've probably got about 50, I should think, globally. That for me was always part of my John Paul Getty kind of thing. It was quite a lot of hard work getting it done. We got up early, we worked hard, and we didn't expect 1,000 years that it would strike as oil in as big a way as it has, and it's become very iconic for us. And so, I think the day my management turn around to me and say, Chris, we're thinking we don't want the airports anymore, and I'll be thinking, well, it's time for me to go. So I feel very, very attached to it. So I think, but I've got a management team who are completely and utterly kind of committed to it. So that's fine. So that won't happen. But I think the sort of ability for us to be visible in lots of different parts of the world is, obviously key to our overall proposition. And so the airports bit is, an important part of what we do. So I think, but how do we amplify that everywhere else? One of the things I think we have learned is content, obviously, which has to be consumable and translatable and all that good stuff. But I think what we've learned is content is absolutely important. And I think, you guys, we work with you very closely, particularly around the YouTube platform. We have a variety of things we've done on that sort of level. And we've done some really interesting, innovative things. There's a sort of mutual friend of someone in the room here, a chap called Pierre Gode, who's one of our kind of characters at the top of the house. We put together a really interesting internal kind of communications thing called HSBC Now. And HSBC Now was a kind of video sort of which contained a lot of business stuff, but also contained human interest stories. And what we persuaded our internal people to let us do, we wouldn't want to put our management up on YouTube, but what we chose to do is take sections of HSBC Now and place them into our YouTube channel, in the HSBC Now YouTube channel, which exists. It's part of the kind of real estate we own with you guys. And what that's done for us is allow a human face of the bank to make its way out there. And we've got some quite interesting stuff. There was a story in 2012, which was one of our Mexican branch staff who's wheelchair bound. represented Mexico at the Paralympic Games in London, and we did her story. And she's a wonderful lady, and she works in one of our branches, and she's terrific. And it's a fantastic story. Our CEO in the UK, Antonio Samoas, is very happy and open about his sexuality, as he, I think, described himself in the press the other day, and I know I'm on safe ground here because this is exactly how he described himself. He's the short, bald Portuguese gay guy who runs the UK. But he was very open about, some of the challenges he's had as a younger man, but actually the kind of importance to us as a bank. So some of that stuff works, I think, to help us. And we had a chap who did something on mental health who had a terrible sort of bout of depression. He did a kind of piece for us. And I think one of the primary roles that also plays for us, and we're just starting this now, again, slowly, but we'll get there, is how do you link to that content from places like our recruitment site? What's it really like to work for HSBC? See some of our human interest stories, click here. Gives you a chance as an employee or prospective employee or kind of graduate from a business school to have a look at us and say, well, what are they really like? And I think for me, the kind of ability for content to problem solve as well is important. So I'll tell you another little personal story. We had a family thing going one Sunday. Everyone's nice and peaceful and quiet. I think I was reading the sports section in the newspaper downstairs after a bit of lunch. My son, who had then been about 14, and his sister, who's 12. His sister, my daughter Flora, is the head of IT in our house. She's brilliant at anything technological. He comes barreling down the stairs, shouting his head off. Flora's mucked up my iPod Touch. I said, what? She's running down after him, going, I didn't. All I did was I told him how to change the password. He changed it. He couldn't remember what it was. He had about 4 goes. He's locked himself out. Oh, God, here we go. So I think to myself, well, am I going to go on the Apple kind of help thing with, lots of perfectly well worded, but nonetheless what I'd call electronic paper, kind of go and thumb your way through the documents. I said to him, come over here, sit down and calm down. Type into the Google search string, locked iPod Touch, and see what happens. And guess what? Second one down was a YouTube video. I said, click on that. And it was some nice young lad from the States again. Nice Californian kid, probably about Charlie's age, going, okay, so you locked your iPod Touch. This is what you do. You hold your finger down on the bottom here, and then it comes up, and you see a little apple, and then you do this, then you do that. Then you press this thing here, that prompts you for a new password. Put something in, don't forget it, do it again, you're done. How easy was that? So, how do we make it easy for you to understand what mutual funds are? How do we start all that content stuff? So when you ask about how we can bring what we believe is our brand to life, it's not about taking the airport posters and trying to shove them into some digital media. It's about trying to understand what is the essence of your brand, which for us, at the moment, we talk about something we call supporting human ambition, which is why together we advance your personal economy. We've actually, in our business stuff, started to talk about the fact that it's never just business. For most people who run their businesses, what we have to understand is it's very, very personal. Imagine the emotions that business people feel on the day they stand at the stock market and they press the bell and it goes ding, 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 and them and their 3 partners see their stock go up for the first time. And they look at their 3 partners and they understand that one of them's been through a shitty divorce and I had to stand by him while he wept against the coffee machine one morning, and the other person who's next to me here, is still trying to beat me at golf every time we go out. It is the one thing he wants to do and he still hasn't taken a bloody hole off me yet. And it's that sort of reflection that is about the business world as well as actually everything else. It's not just about did we supply proper advisory services. It's understanding that for the people who run businesses, it's never just business. And so for us, what we talk about is supporting human ambition. And what we mean by human ambition is the ability for us to collectively progress. That actually a good day is a day where I created 100 jobs in the town that I was born. And I reflect on that. And so those are the kinds of things that we hope when we look at ambition. Human ambition is not standing on the windpipe of my nearest competitor for the big job I want and hoping he chokes to death before I can That's not what ambition's about. We think ambition has to have a collective sense to it as well. Sorry, very long answer to a sort of good question, but thank you. Allowed me to do a quick corporate advert. So, any other questions? I'm not sure what we're doing on time, Oliver, but a lady at the back.
Hi, I'm Ola from Mercedes-Benz Financial Services, and I have maybe an operational question for your retail banking division. So if we're going digital, how many branches, well, you don't have to say how many, but are you going to be shutting down branches, taking them digital? And another thing is how integrated are your customer services around the world? Because when people post something online, right, they expect an answer more or less immediately. So if someone posts a comment in Hong Kong, maybe at midnight, do you have a turnaround time expectation as to when you're going to respond to that? Or how do you manage that aspect?
I think I've got one of my colleagues in the room here who can answer that better than I can. No, I'll leave you alone, Brooks. Let's start and try and unpack what you just asked. First thing, branches. Branches are really, really important, but their role is changing. People don't go into branches as often as they used to for basic transactional stuff around the world, although Hong Kong people love going to branches, so I can't necessarily say that that's the same the world over. But branches are now places where people go for what we call moments of truth. So what you've got to do is make sure you've got enough coverage for that. The day I need a mortgage, the day I want to take out some life insurance, the time I want to change my kind of pension plan is a time when I need to sit down with another member of the human race and make sure I understand it all properly. The rest of the time, please get out of my way and enable me to do whatever I need to do as quickly as possible. So that becomes the kind of thing that you've got to be careful about. You can't just make a binary kind of piece of thinking that says branches are dead, long live the internet. I think there has been, human beings are very good at binary ordered states. They like it to be either sort of black or white, hot or cold. They're not very interested in warm or grey. And actually, we live in a warm, grey world, as you can see outside today. So at the end of the day, I think those are the important things to understand when you talk about branches and all that kind of stuff. We have minimum SLAs to get back to customers. So our Twitter feed stuff is 5 minutes. Actually, it's 7 sometimes. You saw on the chart back there. It doesn't matter what time of day it is. We still say we'll get back to you. So, that for us is absolute minimum. And it doesn't matter what time of day it is. We endeavour to get back to you within 5 to 7 minutes. One of the things you have to understand about those things is expectation. When we did a kind of study once many years ago on branch queuing, in the UK, 2 minutes was acceptable. In Hong Kong, 10 minutes was acceptable. So just means the culture and the kind of nature of what you do. So Hong Kong people felt, 10 minutes queuing at the branch was fine. In the UK, who are, particularly London-based branches, I think it was 2 minutes. If it's longer than 2 minutes, I'm going to be cross. Okay. And so I think you've also got to understand no point in setting some global SLA because actually cultures are very different, and I think that's important. One of the things that we do is we do a customer recommendation score, which is a kind of net promoter score, but without the kind of add the top 3 boxes minus the bottom 5. We don't do that. We just measure the 10, and what that does for us is give us an idea about sort of service quality. But the thing that we have to do with that is only ever look at it in a competitive context in a market. My highest ever score I used to get globally for that, in times gone by when we had a business there, was Panama at 87%. So that was 8.7 was the average score any one of our customers gave us. Sadly for us, we were 6th in market with that score, but it was my top score globally. My worst score globally was Hong Kong at 59, which was 9 points ahead of our competitor average. We were top in market by quite a long way. It's partly because of the culture, and I don't wish this to be this isn't anything other than just a statement of fact, is that when you say to someone from Asia, and it was the same in our other Asian markets, by the way, would you recommend this to your friends and family? It's quite a big ask. They're slightly conservative about how they want to answer that. They go, that's quite a big deal. In Panama, you say, would you recommend it to your family? I recommend everything to my friends and family. I love everyone. Right, fine. Just exuberance and sort of Latino stuff versus a much more conservative and sort of sensible kind of approach. I think Hong Kong people are probably more sensible. Which is why, economies in Latin America, I'm sure, bounce around like they do. And out here, it's a bit more stable. But I think those are the kinds of things that I think are important when you think about what you're doing with your service channels and what your SLAs are. Any others? I might do one more if anyone's got anything, but if you haven't, don't worry about it. Go on in.
Chris, thanks for all of your great insights today. Just a little bit of crystal ball gazing. You talked about stormy weather facing a lot of corporates. What is HSBC going to be like in the next 5 years from a CMO perspective, and how important is digital, mobile, social media, and so on? Is it going to gain momentum?
I think obviously all of those things will grow, and we understand, and we can try and make the right investments wherever we can. I think one of the things I'm going to sort of not dodge the question, because I think it will be kind of clearly different, and I'm not sure what it will look like. I think, you know, there are many things that will shape it. I think the sort of obviously digital world is going to be massive, and so, you know, we've got to continue to make those investments. We've got to continue to try and find those kind of, you know, customer touch points that allow us to kind of do those things. But I think one of the things that I think is worth reflecting on in any times of change for all of us, I don't know if anyone's ever, you know, climbed any mountains or been walking in the hills. I know there's a few people around here who have. But sometimes I remember once, you know, I used a couple of photographs a little while ago I used to do proper silly sort of scary mountain climbing years ago. And sometimes when you get to one of those hills and you can see what looks like the top in front of you and you think, oh, that'll be the top. And you kind of get to it and it's not, and there's another bit. There's always another bit. So there's always that kind of sense when you're in the hills sometimes. You kind of go, that'll be the top. No, that won't, you know, always another bloody hill. Eventually you do get to the top. But, you know, there's always that sense. And so when you stop and take your backpack off and get a water bottle out and turn around and look back down the valley from where you've come a bloody long way. And you can see your car off in the car park someplace, but you can see this amazing vista that you've managed to go and get to see. And I think every now and again what I try and do with my teams is to sit down and say, look at this. Look how far we've come. Don't feel disheartened about the fact that the future is still another hill. Feel good that you might get to the top of the next one and the next one, and sometimes we feel like we're on a bit of a summit for a moment, and then there's another ridge and there's another bit to go. But at the end of the day, I think it's worth pointing out to people, in an environment of constant change, what's it like to look back down the valley once in a while? Let's pause as a team. Let's look back down the valley once in a while and say to ourselves, we've come a long way and it's been worth it. So those kinds of things I think help frame the future, because the future is uncertain. You know, so that's a lovely American military term, VUCA, which is that whole, you know, sort of understanding of everything being kind of uncertain and sort of, you know, constant change. So I think for me, I just take a moment once in a while to kind of look back down the hill before I decide that all I can do is see the change in front of me and feel confident I can embrace that change, whatever it looks like.
Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for the questions. Thanks a lot for Chris. As a token of small appreciation from the AmCham, thanks a lot for those of you, this is the last marketing and communications event of the year. There are plenty of, I think there's about a couple more events next week from the AmCham, so please do participate if you are available to. Otherwise, certainly wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Look forward to seeing everyone next year. Thanks a lot.